This big data and analytics challenge, as I said, is not just a university issue. It's not just university and industry as well. It really even goes back much earlier, or we have to really build the literacy much earlier. The Oceans of Data Institute of the Education Development Center is helping to address this challenge. They've just completed an exciting new project to build a profile of the big data enabled specialist that will be used to drive curricula development. Our first speaker is Joe Ippolito of the EDC, and during his 15 years with the EDC, Joe has worked on curricular projects such as the Lorraine City Schools Magnet School Project and the National Science Foundation funded projects such as the Computational Thinking Enabled Professional Pilot. So with that, please join me in welcoming Joe Ippolito.
Thank you. It's very good to be here. I am a senior project director with Education Development Center. I currently work with the Pathways to College and Careers unit. Recently, I was asked by Ruth Krumhansel, who was here last year, to come here and share with you some of the work that we've done together over the last couple of months. Okay, EDC is an education research and development organization that designs, implements, and evaluates programs meant to improve education. Our worldwide headquarters are outside of Boston, and we currently work in 30 countries, managing 250 projects. Okay, why the Oceans of Data Institute? As you've heard, complex data sets are becoming accessible to all of us, whether we are trained to analyze them or not. And after spending 3 hours in a lab session this morning, I can tell you I am one of the not. In fact, I'm your challenge. I am who you're trying to reach and to educate. Skills like analyzing data, spotting patterns, and extracting useful information are becoming gateway skills to the workforce. Clearly, as we've heard, there is a gap. The Oceans of Data Institute was created by my colleagues at EDC to address this challenge. Their work is focused in 3 areas. In the area of research, they are seeking to better understand what skills need to be taught students and how to do that effectively. They are developing and testing curriculum and providing professional development to teachers, and they are convening a wide array of stakeholders. My own work at EDC has nothing to do with big data. My work deals with workforce development. Over the last 15 years, I have worked to develop occupational profiles of various professions, and that has included some technical fields like social technology-enabled professionals. My own particular focus and interest is in doing that for the clergy, and so we have developed occupational profiles of Roman Catholic priests and Unitarian Universalist ministers. We were asked by ODI to do similar work for them, and we did that using a process that has been validated and used to analyze hundreds of occupations over the last 50 years. It's called the Daycome process. That Daycome is an acronym for developing a curriculum. It was created about 50 years ago by Robert Norton at Ohio State University. We use this particular process because our experience is that it is able, in a very short period of time, to create a succinct and very detailed picture of what an occupation looks like. There are several principles behind our approach. The first is that we work with expert workers and who agree to participate in a guided dialogue about their profession. The second is that a job is defined by tasks performed by expert workers. And that involves having them describe exactly what it is that they do. It also involves them identifying enablers, which are the skills, knowledge, behaviors that enable them to be successful in their careers. It involves identifying common cross-cutting work activities. This is especially true in emerging professions where what we will do is convene individuals who represent a wide variety of industries and seek to identify what they have in common. And the last is that it means identifying all work activities linked to an occupational definition. And that the reason we do that is that it may be the case that not every individual in a particular industry does all of those activities, but we try to capture the whole universe. So, this is the particular expert panel that worked to create the profile I'm going to share with you. It included data scientists from Google and from Microsoft. It included a physician who is using big data to do research into leukemia. It involved a crime analyst from Minnesota who is using big data to predict crime patterns. The process involves a lot of brainstorming, categorizing of information, refining the words that make up the profile, and is created through consensus. This is the profile. So I'll just walk you through it a bit. At the top, you see what we call the learning occupation. In this case, the panel, after a long conversation, came to agreement that the big data-enabled specialist is an individual who wrangles and analyzes large and/or complex data sets to enable new capabilities, including discovery, decision support, and improved outcomes. The learning occupation is it's a concept that was created in Germany several decades ago. It was created because they have a partnership between government and unions and employers. And in trying to develop training programs, they realized they had about 1,700 different occupations, and it would be impossible to create individual training programs for every one of them. And so the idea was to cluster together similar occupations to find the common skills and common work activities that they had so that they could train towards those. And what that did is obviously it saved money, but it also allowed for cross-training. So once the panel developed this occupational definition, they were involved in hours of brainstorming, and we pushed them over the 2 days to be as exhaustive as possible in defining what it is that they do. And then we work with them to organize and to categorize that information. So on the left-hand column, what you see there are what we call duties. Those are the large clusters of work. They are large areas of work responsibility. And in this case, out of all of the brainstorming that the panel did, they identified 7 of these duties. And those are defines the problem, wrangles data, manages data resources, develops methods and tools, analyzes data, communicates findings, engages in professional development. With the rest of the activities, what they did then is to organize them according to those duties. And so what you see running then from left to right to the duties are the tasks. These are related to the duty. They are in an order that does not necessarily signify priority. We ask the panel when they're organizing the tasks to try to put them in some kind of logical sequence, something that follows the flow of work. So I think you have, if I counted right, you have 79 tasks in this case that were identified that relate to these 7 duties. This is meant to represent the universe of activities related to the big data-enabled specialists. But I want to stress that when we're working with the panel, we are asking them continuously to go back to that definition. So the definition is the anchor of the entire profile. The other thing we ask them actually at the end is we ask them once they're done, and I'll show you the second part of the profile, once this is completed, we ask them whether or not they can see themselves in this profile, whether or not they perform every one of the tasks or not. And on the right, unfortunately it's a little small, but you can see the actual panel members. We then ask the panel to identify, again, thinking about the definition, what skills are necessary for that individual to have in order to be successful at what they do? What are the areas of knowledge that they need to have in order to be successful at what they do? What behaviors do they need to have? What equipment and tools? And then last, we engage them in a conversation to identify trends and concerns within the field, and then to look ahead 5 years to see, well, what do you anticipate happening? Dialogue that we do with the expert panel, and at the conclusion of that, and when we've done it with other industry sectors, we feel pretty confident that we've captured something that accurately illustrates what the work is about. But to make sure, what we do then is we do a validation of the profile. We have an online survey that is circulated to other people in the field, and the other people in the field have an opportunity to look at the profile, and we ask them to consider these things. We ask them, first of all, to look at each of the tasks that you see in the profile and determine how important that task is to what they do. Secondly, we ask them to look at all of the tasks and to identify how frequently they do each of those tasks. Then lastly, we ask them to look at the knowledge, skills, and behaviors, and looking at them, give us some idea as to whether or not the whole list, the items in the list are important to what they do. And they also have an opportunity to make general comments. In the case of the profile that you have here, we had 188 respondents. 100 completed the entire survey. We had more than 15 industry sectors represented. Maybe Steve had something, but we had a flood of IBM people review the profile, and so the percentages here might actually be skewed, but we did have a fairly wide array of professions represented from the people that actually looked at the profile, reviewed it. And based on the results that we've gotten, we feel as if the profile has been validated. In the case of every single task on the profile, 80% or more of the individuals who reviewed it felt that each task was either important, very important, or essential. There were some enablers, some of the skills and some of the behaviors that did not get 80% plus. And so what we do with those in this case is send that back to the panel, the expert panel, and based on their judgment, they determine whether or not they ought to be dropped. I think, for example, one of the skills was keyboarding. And so I think only 50% or so of the people who reviewed it thought that that was an essential skill. And so based on what the expert panel says, we may drop that from the final version of the profile. In terms of the skills, just to give that out of that entire list that you saw, and I see a head nodding, so probably this is not very surprising. Out of all of the skills, the skill that was rated the highest or the most important was analytical thinking, and the next four in order were critical thinking, problem solving, applying statistical methods, and data manipulation. As far as knowledge, again, analytic thinking, algorithms, data modeling, data structures, best practices, statistics. And in terms of behaviors, you can see there and the percentages that each received. As far as the biggest current trends and concerns. A lot of them sound like things I've been hearing all of you talk about today. Certainly the public understanding of data remains low, and there's certainly a big need to increase the education of people able to perform these jobs. 5 years from now, the panel believes that out of the trends that the panel identified, these received the highest percentage of respondents. Okay, so then as far as what we do next, these are just sample questions of what drives the work now in the future. The first is how can we, now that we have the profile, how can we measure how well an individual does each of the tasks that are identified there? And typically what we will do is we will reconvene the expert panel, and working with them, we will ask them to provide concrete illustrations of what the tasks look like when they are performed well. So we have them define proficiency, and then we work with them to build a four-tier measurement, a four-tier set of indicators that describe what the tasks look like at incrementally more skilled performance. So we have proficiency defined, and then we go to beginning proficiency, in between proficiency, and then advanced proficiency. We're in the process right now of trying to raise funds to do that. The second question driving the future work is whether or not this process can be used to develop profiles of other big data occupations. I can't remember the figure offhand, but we asked them to survey for individuals to indicate what role they played with big data in their organizations. And I believe it was 55% of the individuals identified themselves as managers, and something like 40% identified themselves as part of a big data team. And so we suspect that there is room then to define other occupations within big data, which would then help us eventually build a big data career pathway, or at least to draw that out. Then a last question is whether or not, not whether or not, but whether there are clusters of skills that can be put together that would define what big data occupations are available for individuals who have completed a 2-year degree and or training certificate. So these are some of the ways that ODI hopes to use the profile to improve educational programs. And as I mentioned, we're in the process of working with workforce educators to do these various things. And I guess that's it. I don't know if you have any questions or comments, or maybe if you could let me know whether or not the profile is something that you could see yourself using, and if so, how.